What if I told you that the absolute most destructive thing you can do to your organization is to make sure everyone is working at 100% capacity?
I mean, it sounds completely insane, right? It goes against
everything.
Yeah, literally every fundamental principle that modern management has drilled into our heads for a century.
Right. Think about that for a second. What if making sure your team is completely busy, all day, every day?
Yeah.
What if that is the exact mathematical formula that guarantees your output will just grind to a halt?
It is an inescapable physical reality, actually, even if it feels wrong.
So welcome back, everyone. If you've been following our recent deep dives into, well, the physical mechanics of human organization, we've been swimming in some incredibly deep, complex waters lately.
Very deep. And we left off last time on a pretty intense cliffhanger, honestly.
We did. We were looking at the sheer biological cost of the modern workplace. Specifically, we were exploring that ATP tax of context switching.
Right, exactly. We unpacked how Landauer's erasure, which, is this rigid principle from thermodynamics, how it literally overheats the human brain when we are forced to constantly thrash between tasks.
Yeah, we talked about working memory just being wiped.
Yeah.
Metabolic exhaustion, people literally burning out at a cellular level.
Because the modern corporate environment, it's just burning through its human capital. It treats biological wetware as if it were silicon.
It just assumes the human brain can process simultaneous inputs with zero physical cost.
Ooh.
Which is wild. But we left the biggest question hanging in the air, like why?
Right. Why is the system designed this way?
Exactly. Why is your environment forcing you to constantly switch context, to battle this avalanche of digital noise, and basically live in a permanent state of firefighting?
And today we are finally answering that ultimate question. And to do it, we really have to dismantle what our source material calls the 100% efficiency trap.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want you, the listener, to completely clear your head. Forget the soft language of human resources. Forget, everything you've been taught about productivity or hustle culture.
Yeah, throw all that out, because today we are translating the boardroom into the unforgiving laws of fluid dynamics and mathematics.
We have to establish a massive paradigm shift right here at the start. Slack, and by that we mean empty space on a calendar, breathing room, unallocated bandwidth. That is not laziness.
No, absolutely not. It is not wasted payroll.
Right.
In the strict realm of operational physics, slack is the literal physical space required for motion. Without it, a system doesn't just, slow down gracefully.
It seizes up.
Exactly. It mathematically seizes up and collapses under its own density.
So to understand why your office feels like an endless treadmill where you're sprinting at maximum heart rate but somehow never moving forward, we really have to look at how the modern C-suite actually measures success.
And the source text provides this perfect, almost chilling little vignette to set the scene.
Yeah, let's bring back our recurring archetype of the thermodynamic executive CEO 8.
So it's a Monday morning. 8 is sitting in on a quarterly audit for his global consulting division. And the managing partner of this division is leading the presentation, and he is just beaming.
Super proud of himself.
Oh, incredibly proud. He projects this massive digital dashboard onto the glass wall of the boardroom, and the entire board is just covered in green indicators.
The ultimate executive comfort blanket, right? The green dashboard.
Exactly. And the managing partner proudly announces that his team has successfully eradicated all idle time across the entire global division.
Wow.
Yeah. Every single engineer, every data analyst, every consultant, they are all billed out and scheduled at 98 to 100% capacity for the next 6 solid months.
And he declares to the room, we are running at absolute maximum efficiency.
Right. He honestly expects a standing ovation. He thinks he has engineered the perfect corporate machine.
But CEO 8 doesn't applaud. He doesn't even nod.
No. Instead, he reaches over, completely bypasses the carefully curated slide deck, and pulls up a live traffic camera feed.
A live feed of the Los Angeles 405 freeway at the absolute peak of rush hour. Which, if you have ever been to LA or even just seen pictures, you know exactly what this looks like.
It is a parking lot.
A sea of red brake lights stretching out into the horizon. Every single inch of the asphalt is covered in metal, rubber, and just deeply frustrated commuters.
And 8 points to this gridlock and says something that fundamentally shatters the managing partner's illusion. He says, that freeway is operating at 100% capacity. Every square foot of asphalt is utilized.
And the velocity of this system is exactly 0.
Yes. You have not engineered peak performance. You have engineered a traffic jam.
That analogy, it maps so perfectly to the corporate delusion. because it exposes the massive flaw in the underlying logic. The Freeway is 100% full, so by the managing partner's spreadsheet logic, it must be 100% efficient.
Right, because the resource is fully utilized. But we all intrinsically understand that a freeway at 100% capacity is completely useless.
Right. The fundamental purpose of a freeway is to allow vehicles to travel at high velocity from point A to point B.
When utilization hits 100%, the velocity drops to zero. The system's actual purpose is destroyed by its own density.
You haven't engineered peak performance. You've engineered a parking lot. It's such a visceral image. The empty asphalt isn't waste. The empty asphalt is the physical space that allows the cars to drive.
Exactly.
But if this is so incredibly obvious when we look at a highway, why are modern executives so utterly obsessed with this 100% metric? Like, where does this pathology even come from?
Well, we have to trace this back over a century to really understand why it's so deeply embedded in our corporate DNA. We have to go back to 1911, to a mechanical engineer named Frederick Winslow Taylor.
Taylorism. The birth of the guy with the clipboard and the stopwatch standing over the factory worker.
That's the exact origin point. Taylor was at Midvale Steel in Philadelphia, and he published a deeply influential doctrine called the Principles of Scientific Management. He looked at human laborers moving pig iron on a factory floor and decided they were literal mechanical gears in an industrial apparatus.
Not people, just gears.
Right. His entire philosophy was built around strictly quantifying physical output and viciously eradicating what the 19th century bosses called soldiering.
Soldiering, which was just their derogatory term for any form of idle time.
Exactly. To the legacy Taylorists, a machine that is not spinning is a machine that is wasting money. Because in 1911, the work was purely physical and highly repetitive. You swing a hammer, you lift a piece of iron. If the hammer isn't swinging, the iron isn't moving.
The input is directly, visibly tied to the output. So Taylor's logic was just eliminate the rest, speed up the swing, and you get more iron moved.
And in a purely mechanical environment doing repetitive physical labor, you actually could force a crude short-term increase in output that way, though obviously usually at the cost of the worker's physical health.
But the terrifying part is that we aren't moving pig iron anymore. We are doing highly complex knowledge work. Yet a century later, modern executives still operate under this primitive mechanical paradigm.
It's just been given a software update. Economists call it digital Taylorism.
Instead of a man with a stopwatch on a factory floor, it's digital dashboards, calendar analytics, keystroke trackers, algorithms.
Yes. They view an empty block of time on a software engineer's calendar exactly the same way Taylor viewed a worker putting down their hammer to take a breath as stolen payroll.
Stolen payroll. So they demand fully allocated bandwidth. They want back-to-back video meetings, maxed out project pipelines, 100% billable hours.
The source text calls this a telemetry failure. They honestly believe that maximizing busyness at the input level mathematically equates to maximizing the final output.
If the keyboard is clacking, code must be shipping.
Right. If everyone looks incredibly stressed and busy, the company must be dominating the market. But they are fundamentally disastrously wrong.
Disastrously wrong.
Because when a manager demands 100% utilization in a knowledge work environment, they are deliberately inducing systemic paralysis. And to truly grasp why this happens, we have to abandon the soft, subjective language of management theory. We need to adopt the hard language of fluid dynamics.
Okay, fluid dynamics. I love this. Let's bring some physics into the boardroom. How exactly does water moving through a pipe explain my terrible Outlook calendar?
Think about it this way. In the physical sciences, the rate at which a substance moves through a medium is governed by its resistance to internal flow. This property is known as viscosity.
Viscosity, okay.
If you have a narrow pipe and you turn on a pump to push water through it, the water moves very rapidly. Why? Because the internal friction of water is extremely low. The molecules easily slide past one another. The system experiences what we call laminar flow.
It's aerodynamic. The system doesn't fight itself.
Exactly. Now, take that exact same narrow pipe using the exact same pump and try to force dense, cold molasses through it. The flow rate collapses immediately. The internal friction of the molasses, its viscosity, violently resists the shear stress being applied by the pump. The molecules are too densely packed. They tangle and drag against each other. The system chokes.
And what you're saying is that a corporate system packed to 100% capacity behaves exactly like cold molasses.
It is the exact same physical principle. When you overlap workloads, when you schedule back-to-back meetings with zero transition time, when you fill every single cognitive gap in a worker's day, you drastically increase the density of the system.
You make the system viscous.
Yes. That density creates massive internal friction. The overlapping dependencies fundamentally resist any forward kinetic displacement. People are moving frantically, but the actual work is paralyzed by the friction of constant handoffs and conflicting priorities.
So we have two completely different ways of looking at how an organization runs. The text introduces this as the fundamental dichotomy between resource efficiency and flow efficiency. Break those two down, because this seems like the pivot point for the whole argument.
This dichotomy is perhaps the most critical concept in modern operations theory. Let's start with resource efficiency. This paradigm focuses entirely, exclusively on the utilization of the input node.
The input node.
Right. It looks at the individual component, the specific employee or the specific server. It asks, is the machine currently running? Is the software engineer actively typing? Is the consultant currently billing hours to a client?
It's the managing partner from the opening story staring at his green dashboard. Are my people 100% busy?
Yes. That is pure resource efficiency. But flow efficiency asks an entirely different question. It ignores the individual node entirely. It focuses exclusively on the velocity of the output vector.
The output.
It asks, how fast does a single unit of value travel from its initial inception all the way into the hands of the customer without ever stopping?
Okay, I see the distinction. Resource efficiency is about making sure the worker is sweating. Flow efficiency is about making sure the actual product is moving.
That is a perfect summation. And the paradox that entirely evades the legacy executive is this: optimizing for resource efficiency mathematically destroys flow efficiency.
I want to pause right there and just let that sink in, because that is the trap. Optimizing for resource efficiency mathematically destroys flow efficiency. If I pack my team's calendar to 100%, I am guaranteeing the product takes longer to ship.
Let's go back to the freeway. If you pack every single lane of a highway with cars, which is 100% resource efficiency, right? You're maximizing the use of the asphalt.
Yeah.
But the velocity of those cars drops to zero. You have achieved 0% flow efficiency. The cars are all running their engines, burning gas, generating heat, but nobody is getting home.
Because in their frantic pursuit to eliminate what they perceive as idle time, management is literally stripping away the physical space required for the system to move.
The text summarizes this with a pretty brutal reality check. Optimizing for resource efficiency provides short-term executive comfort because everyone looks busy and the telemetry dashboards glow green. But it guarantees the erosion of long-term competitiveness because it destroys flow.
That's just optics.
Right. High resource efficiency results in maximum thermal vibration, people running around frantically putting out fires, but exponential queues and total gridlock. High flow efficiency, on the other hand, results in maximum kinetic velocity. Work gets done smoothly and quietly.
It almost requires an ego death for a manager. You have to accept that your team might look less busy, they might have gaps in their schedule, but the actual value you're delivering to the market will skyrocket. Slack is not a waste of money. Slack is the mathematical prerequisite for velocity.
And if that freeway analogy still sounds like just a clever metaphor to you, the text goes on to prove that it isn't. It is an unbreakable mathematical law governing our universe.
Right. To prove the absolute necessity of Slack, we have to turn to this highly specialized discipline called queuing theory.
Yeah.
Queuing theory. The literal science of waiting in line. I didn't even know this was an entire branch of mathematics until I read the source material.
Oh, it is a massive field. It is the mathematical study of waiting lines, and it governs everything in the physical universe that experiences constraints and variable demand.
Like what?
It dictates how data packets traverse a fiber optic silicon network. It governs how physical parts move through a complex automotive assembly line. It determines how patients arrive and are processed at a hospital triage center.
And it absolutely governs how tasks move across an engineer's desk or a designer's workflow.
Exactly.
So let's look at the unforgiving mathematics of this. 1961. British mathematician named Sir John Kingman publishes a landmark paper titled The Single Server Queue in Heavy Traffic. And in it, he introduces what operations scientists refer to as Kingman's formula, or the VUT equation.
This equation remains one of the most critical and tragically most widely ignored laws of operations management. It provides a precise mathematical approximation for the expected waiting time of any item in a system that is operating close to saturation.
Okay, explaining math on an audio deep dive is always risky, but we need to walk through this formula slowly. Because once you see how the math actually works, you just can't unsee the horror of what we do to our teams.
It's eye-opening.
So Kingman's formula states that the expected wait time of a task in a system is the product of three distinct variables: variation, utilization, and time. V times U times T.
Right.
Let's start with the middle variable, because this is the one that causes the catastrophic collapse, the utilization component.
The utilization component is represented mathematically by the fraction rho divided by 1 minus rho. Let's unpack that slowly. Rho, the Greek letter, represents the utilization rate of the system as a decimal. So if a worker is 80% utilized, rho is 0.80. If they are 90% utilized, rho is 0.90.
Simple enough.
But the danger lies in the denominator of that fraction. It is 1 minus rho. This is the mechanism that governs the explosive nature of the formula. Think about what happens as utilization approaches 100%. As rho approaches 1.0, the denominator of that fraction approaches 0.
Right. 1 minus 0.99 is 0.01. And as anyone who has ever tried to divide by a tiny fraction knows, as the denominator gets smaller, the value of the overall result shoots up drastically.
It shoots up asymptotically. Let me give you an analogy that might make the math more intuitive. Imagine you are trying to pack a suitcase for a long trip. When the suitcase is only 10% full, tossing a pair of shoes in takes 1 second.
Yeah, you just drop them in. The utilization is low, the effort is low.
Now imagine the suitcase is 95% full. It's packed incredibly tight. Adding that exact same pair of shoes now takes 5 minutes of rearranging, pushing, compressing, and fighting the existing contents. The effort doesn't increase by 10%, it increases exponentially.
Right.
That is what Kingman's formula maps out. What's fascinating here is that the expected wait time does not rise linearly. It doesn't go up in a straight, predictable line. As you push a system toward 100% capacity, the expected wait time rockets asymptotically toward infinity.
Towards infinity, meaning the delay becomes so massive that the work functionally never gets done.
That's the utilization component. The next variable we have to multiply it by is the variation component, or V. This factor measures the inherent unpredictability of the system.
Right, because knowledge work is not a factory. It's not stamping out the exact same steel bolt every 3 seconds with absolute mechanical precision.
Exactly. In the corporate enterprise, variation is the fundamental reality of existence. Client demands change mid-project. A sudden macroeconomic shift invalidates your strategy. A software bug that was supposed to take 3 hours to fix ends up taking 3 days because it uncovered a deeper architectural flaw.
It's messy.
Very messy. The variation component combines the unpredictability of when work arrives and the unpredictability of how long it takes to finish. And here is the terrifying part of Kingman's math. In his formula, the variation variables are squared.
Squared. Wait, meaning if a task is highly unpredictable, it doesn't just add a little bit of delay. It aggressively, violently compounds the delay.
Yes, it blows it up. And finally, we have the time component, or T. This is simply the mean service time, the average physical duration required to complete the task in a perfect vacuum without any interruptions. It acts as the baseline multiplier for the massive delays engineered by the utilization and variation components.
Okay, let me jump in here with some pushback because I really want to clarify the severity of this for someone listening right now who might be managing a team. These 3 variables, variation, utilization, and time, they are multiplied together. They aren't added.
They are multiplied. The penalty is multiplicative. It compounds on itself.
So if I am a manager and I just push my team's utilization up by a mere 30%, say I take them from being 50% busy to 80% busy, the wait times for our deliverables don't just go up 30%.
Oh, not even close. Because of the math in the utilization fraction, a 30% increase in utilization from 50 to 80 results in a 400% increase in wait time.
It's a 400% increase.
Yeah. The multiplier goes from a 1.0x penalty at 50% utilization to a 4.0x penalty at 80% utilization.
A 400% spike in delays?
Okay.
Just for asking people to be 80% busy? And what if I do what the managing partner did in our opening story? What if I demand maximum efficiency? What if I push the system to 99% utilization?
Let's run the math. At 99% utilization, rho is 0.99. The denominator is 1 minus 0.99, which is 0.01. So the multiplier becomes 0.99 divided by 0.01. The multiplier is 99.
A 99x multiplier on wait times. So a task that should take 1 day now takes 99 days because it is stuck in the friction of the system.
Exactly. At maximum utilization, the system fundamentally collapses under its own physical weight. It becomes entirely incapable of processing work. High utilization, coupled with high variability, mathematically guarantees exponential gridlock.
To really drive this home and make it practical, the source text provides a visual diagnostic mapping out 4 operational states based on this formula. Let's walk through the telemetry of what this looks like inside a company.
Imagine a massive chart mapping wait time on the vertical axis against utilization on the horizontal axis.
Okay. State 1 is what the text calls the tipping point. This is when utilization is at exactly 80% and variation is at a baseline, normal level of 1.0. In this state, the expected wait time multiplier sits at 4.0.
Right. At 80% utilization with baseline variation, the system is functioning at the absolute edge of the stable zone. The organization is on a precipice. Flow is still occurring, value is still being delivered, but any further demand, any tiny spike in friction will trigger that asymptotic spike into the stratosphere.
Which brings us to state 2, the variation blowout. In this scenario, utilization remains locked exactly where it was at 80%. You haven't added any extra work. But let's say the unpredictability of the market doubles. A major client changes their mind, a server goes down, the supply chain hiccups, variation hits 2.0.
Now remember that the variation variables are squared in the formula. Because of that, the wait time multiplier violently rockets from 4.0 to 16.0.
No.
The wait time spikes to 16 times the normal duration. And notice the key detail here. We did not add a single hour of extra utilization.
The utilization stayed firmly at 80%.
Exactly. But because the environment was highly unpredictable, an 80% utilization rate proved to be mathematically fatal. The system enters a state of severe congestion purely from the noise of the market.
Okay, so if I'm a leader and I'm watching my wait times hit 16x because the market is chaotic, how do I fix that? That leads us to state 3, slack as a buffer. The variation in the market is still dangerously high at 2.0. It's chaotic out there. But the executive looks at the math and actively intervenes. They manually force the internal utilization down to 70%. They tell their team to drop lower priority tasks and create breathing room.
This is crucial. By injecting just 10% of structural slack into the system, dropping the utilization from 80% to 70%, the wait time multiplier immediately drops from 16.0 down to 9.33.
Wow. It nearly cuts the delay in half, just by doing less.
Yes. This mathematically proves that unallocated capacity is not wasted payroll. It is the literal physical shock absorber required to process chaotic market noise without seizing the engine. It's the suspension system on your car allowing you to hit a pothole without snapping the axle.
And finally, we arrive at state 4, the kinetic safe zone. You keep your team's utilization capped at 70%. And through good management and clear requirements, you manage to control the variance of the work back down to a baseline 1.0.
And in that optimal state, the wait time multiplier collapses to 2.33. The curve entirely flattens out. The system now possesses immense aerodynamic clearance. It can maintain high-velocity laminar flow. You are delivering products incredibly fast, adapting to changes effortlessly, without ever risking the burnout or dialectic breakdown of your human nodes.
So we've established the raw math. The physics are absolutely undeniable. But how does an exploding queue actually manifest in the real world? How does Kingman's formula translate to the modern knowledge work enterprise? Because we aren't moving cars on a freeway and we aren't stamping steel bolts. We are moving information.
The text gives us another perfect boardroom translation to visualize this. CEO 8 is auditing the global engineering division. He stands in front of their massive digital Kanban board, the software they use to track all ongoing projects.
Like JIRA.
Exactly. There are 300 engineers in this division, fully utilized, working at absolute maximum capacity. And on the board, there are 4,200 JIRA tickets sitting in the in-progress column.
4,200 active tasks being juggled simultaneously. The chief technology officer of this division is fiercely defending this board. He's pointing to the sheer volume of activity and saying, look at how efficient we are. Everyone is tackling every single ticket simultaneously. We have zero idle time.
But 8 pulls a telemetry for the system's actual cycle time. The average time it takes for a single ticket to move from started to finished is a staggering 84 days.
Nearly 3 months to finish a single task.
And 8 shuts off the monitor and says, You are not executing work. You are just storing thermal mass. Your factory floor is covered in invisible inventory, and your engineers are suffocating under the physical weight of the queue.
Invisible inventory. I really want to pause on that phrase, because mapping queuing physics to a digital boardroom requires us to understand how work physically exists in a cloud-based space.
Right, let's map the specific variables of Kingman's formula to the modern office. First, variation, or V. In knowledge work, variation isn't a flaw, it is the fundamental reality of the market. It's the chronic scope creep initiated by anxious stakeholders. It's the intense cognitive discovery required when writing an entirely new software architecture.
No two marketing campaigns are identical.
Right. No two legal contracts are exactly the same. Every task requires a varying amount of unique cognitive processing, so variation is inherently unavoidably high.
And utilization, this is the aggregate load placed on the human capital. It's the back-to-back Zoom meetings, the fully booked calendars, the project backlogs that stretch out into 2028.
When these two realities collide, inherently high variation meeting aggressively mandated 99% utilization, the mathematics of Kingman's formula trigger a catastrophic operational seizure. If an engineering team is perfectly saturated with zero idle time, they have zero slack to absorb the variation. So if a client sends a single emergency request or a project scope shifts by even 1%, the entire operational pipeline collapses into infinite delay.
But the work doesn't just disappear. If it's not getting finished, where does it go? It doesn't evaporate.
It backs up into queues. And this is where the operations theorist Donald Reinertson's work becomes absolutely brilliant. He identified these corporate queues as invisible inventory.
Right, because if you run a physical factory, say a Toyota automotive plant, and a machine is overutilized and breaks down, management can literally see the inventory piling up on the concrete floor.
It's obvious.
Yeah, there's a massive physical mountain of car doors blocking the aisle. It is an undeniable visual indicator of a bottleneck. You physically trip over the queue.
Exactly. But in a modern office, the inventory is entirely invisible. It doesn't take up physical space. It consists of thousands of unread emails buried in an inbox. It's unapproved design drafts hiding in a Figma file. It's massive pull requests waiting for code review on GitHub. It's 4,200 stagnant JIRA tickets sitting silently on an Amazon Web Services cloud server.
Because the executives can't physically see the mountain of car doors, they vastly underestimate the economic devastation it's causing. They suffer from severe queue blindness. They just keep focusing on making sure the engineers are typing, obsessing over resource efficiency, instead of watching the work age, decay, and rot in the digital pipeline, ignoring flow efficiency.
And this blindness triggers what the text calls the thermodynamic death spiral.
Okay, here's where it really gets interesting, because this connects everything. This leads us directly back to our previous deep dive. This is the exact mechanism that causes the catastrophic burnout we discussed in episode 5.
It is the root cause. Let's walk through the causality step by step. As these invisible queues explode mathematically and wait times stretch from days to 84 days, the stakeholders, the clients, the vice presidents, the project managers, they begin to panic.
They see absolutely nothing getting delivered.
Right. So to bypass the infinite queue, they begin to expedite tasks. They assign urgent or emergency priority tags to try and force their specific work through the gridlock.
We have all lived this. I know you're busy, but this needs to happen right now. It's the ping on your messaging app at 4:30 p.m.
Exactly. To handle that emergency request, the overutilized knowledge worker is forced to halt their current process. They must completely unload the complex mental architecture of the active task they're working on and forcefully load the new, highly complex parameters of the expedited task into their working memory.
Which triggers Landauer's erasure tax. We covered this extensively last time. The worker is burning massive amounts of biological ATP to execute that context thrash. They are literally dissipating physical heat to clear their cognitive RAM.
Yes. And if we connect this to the mathematical framework of Kingman's formula, this constant context thrashing directly degrades the time, the T component of the equation. Because the worker is constantly juggling multiple urgent projects and losing hours of productivity to the severe cognitive overhead of task switching, their fundamental service rate drops. It physically takes them longer to do everything.
And here's the fatal loop. If it takes them longer to complete tasks because their brain is exhausted, their fundamental utilization rate, rho, mathematically climbs even higher. It pushes them even closer to that 100% asymptote.
It is a closed-loop thermodynamic death spiral. You force utilization to 100%, That geometrically explodes the queue. The exploded queue causes stakeholders to panic and expedite. Expediting causes severe context thrashing. Context thrashing degrades the baseline service time. The degraded service time pushes utilization even higher, which explodes the queue even further.
It's an inescapable vortex. By demanding 100% busyness, the executive locks the organization into an unbroken cycle of infinite delay. The team stops delivering predictable work entirely and devolves into a permanent state of what the text calls low-exergy firefighting.
We should define exergy here as it's crucial. In thermodynamics, exergy is the portion of energy that is actually available to be used to perform physical work. A system can be full of energy, like a room full of hot air, but have very low exergy, meaning you can't extract any useful work from it. The team in this death spiral has massive energy. They are frantic, stressed, constantly moving, but their kinetic output, their exergy, is near zero.
And this gridlock doesn't just happen to mid-level software teams struggling with JIRA tickets. To truly see Kingman's formula exert its dominance over executive ambition, we can look at a macroscopic example. We can look at a scenario where billions of dollars were on the line, and the strict laws of physics brought one of the world's most valuable companies to its knees.
You are talking about the near bankruptcy of Tesla in 2018, the infamous Model 3 production hell.
To set this up, the text gives us one more critical vignette with CEO 8. He's reviewing a massive capital expenditure request from his VP of supply chain. The VP wants $40 million to build a fully automated robotics upgrade for a complex packaging line. The VP explicitly promises that this expensive robotics suite will completely eliminate all human workers, remove all human error, eradicate all idle time, and achieve a flawless 100% systemic utilization.
It is the absolute ultimate Taylorist dream, a perfectly utilized machine that never rests, never breathes, and never requires slack.
But 8 rejects the proposal immediately. He slides the massive binder back across the table and warns the VP, you cannot automate variation. If you build a highly rigid system with zero physical slack, the first anomaly will tear the machine apart. You are building an alien Dreadnought. It will fail.
An alien Dreadnought, which, crucially, was the exact term Elon Musk used for his grand vision of the Model 3 factory in Fremont, California.
Yes. In the lead up to the mass market launch of the Model 3, which, was supposed to be the car that saved the company, Elon Musk had an absolute mandate. He wanted to design a manufacturing facility entirely devoid of human limitations, human rest, and human slack. He wanted to build a hyper-compressed facility consisting entirely of high-speed robotics and self-learning software.
He wanted a factory that operated at the absolute mathematical boundary of 100% resource efficiency. Zero empty space on the floor, zero idle time in the processing cycle.
The directive was explicitly to design for 100% utilization. But the physical reality of manufacturing a highly complex vehicle did not care about executive directives or stock prices. The highly rigid, hyper-utilized robotic system collided immediately and violently with the physical variation, the V in our formula, that is inherent in building automobiles.
The collision of U and V. Because the automated system was pushed to its absolute maximum capacity, it possessed zero structural slack to absorb inconsistencies. It was entirely brittle. It couldn't adapt.
And this collision manifested in 2 catastrophic physical failures that the text details. The first was what infamously became known as the flufferbot.
The flufferbot. Let's explore the physical reality of this because it perfectly illustrates the concept of physical variation. Tesla engineers attempted to fully automate the placement of fiberglass sound-dampening mats. These mats are placed on top of the vehicle's battery packs to reduce cabin noise for the driver.
But fiberglass matting is not a piece of precisely machined steel. It is inherently variable. It's light, it's flexible, it's porous, and its geometry is completely inconsistent from piece to piece. It's fluff.
Exactly. So you have a robotic arm that is programmed for absolute, rigid spatial precision. It expects a material to be in the exact same millimeter of space every single time. It is operating at peak utilization, moving incredibly fast. But when it tries to pick up a piece of material that behaves unpredictably, that droops or shifts or compresses, it entirely lacks the capacity to adapt.
Right.
The robotic system routinely failed to grab the fiberglass properly. And because the system was perfectly utilized with zero buffer time, every single time the robot fumbled a piece of fluff, the entire automated assembly line had to halt.
Musk eventually had to admit that trying to automate the placement of fluff was a massive, costly mistake. But the second failure was even more dangerous, structurally speaking, the coaxial harness.
Yes, this was a severe structural variation failure. Tesla highly automated the installation of the complex wire harnesses in the trunk lid. The assumption, again driven by resource efficiency, was that machines could route and place rigid cables much faster and much more efficiently than human hands.
Which sounds incredibly logical on paper. Robots are faster than hands.
But again, the system lacked slack. The rigid automated placement was completely devoid of the micro adjustments and tactile feedback that human assemblers naturally use. When a human installs a cable, they feel the tension. They ensure there's just enough give, a mechanical slack loop, to allow for movement. The robots possess no such tactile awareness. They just pulled the cables incredibly tight to save millimeters of space and lock them in.
And what was the long-term result of that rigidity?
Over time, the repeated physical stress of owners opening and closing their trunks caused the solid core of those over-tightened coaxial cables to separate and snap. It physically destroyed the rear-view camera feeds. This relentless pursuit of automated, rigid efficiency triggered a massive NHTSA recall affecting nearly 500,000 vehicles.
500,000 cars recall because the system structurally lacked mechanical slack. And the macroeconomic result of this entire 100% utilized Dreadnought experiment, the asymptotic penalty.
Production hell. By pushing the entire factory to operate as a tightly wound, 100% utilized monolith, Tesla achieved exactly what Kingman's formula dictates: exponential delay.
They had promised Wall Street and hundreds of thousands of pre-order customers that they would be producing 5,000 Model 3s a week. Instead, they were bleeding cash at an unprecedented rate and managed to produce barely 260 cars over an entire 3-month period.
260 cars in 3 months. That equates to roughly 3 cars a day. A multi-billion-dollar robotic facility operating at the speed of a boutique custom shop. The system experienced complete, paralyzing operational gridlock. It was the literal physical manifestation of the right side of the VUT curve skyrocketing toward infinity.
So how did they survive? How did they break the physics?
That's the point. They didn't break the physics, they submitted to them. To save the company from imminent bankruptcy, Musk was forced to execute a highly public, highly embarrassing pivot. He had to physically de-automate the factory.
The famous GA4 tint.
Yes. They didn't have the time or capital to build a new brick-and-mortar facility, so in just 2 weeks, they erected a massive sprung structure, literally a giant tent in the Fremont factory parking lot. They designated it General Assembly 4, and inside this tent, using scrap material pulled from warehouses, Tesla ripped out the rigid robotics and reintroduced human workers to the critical choke points.
Musk tweeted later, "Excessive automation at Tesla was a mistake. To be precise, my mistake. Humans are underrated." But why are humans underrated in this specific operational context?
Because human beings possess adaptive intelligence. In the strict context of queuing physics, human wetware acts as the ultimate form of systemic slack.
I love that framing. The human being is the systemic slack.
When a wire harness doesn't fit perfectly, or a piece of fiberglass behaves unpredictably, a human hand instinctively adjusts. A human uses their peripheral vision, their tactile feedback, their vast contextual experience to absorb the variation on the fly without halting the entire assembly line. The humans in the GA4 tent provided the critical margin of unutilized capacity, the adaptive slack required to process the chaos and keep the work moving.
By stepping away from the 100% efficiency trap and deploying human slack, Tesla restored flow efficiency, rapidly scaled up to hit their 5,000 unit weekly target, and save the company.
Which brings us to the most critical, actionable part of this analysis. If human beings are the essential biological shock absorbers of an organization, how do we protect them? How do we defend them from executives who are constantly obsessed with cutting waste?
Right. How do we engineer strategic slack?
Let's go back to the boardroom for one final confrontation. It's 4:00 p.m., and CEO 8 is sitting across from his chief financial officer. The CFO slides a spreadsheet across the massive table and aggressively points to a column labeled excess capacity.
And the CFO says, "I've audited the engineering pods. They're currently operating at roughly 80% utilization. If we eliminate the bottom 20% of the headcount, we can seamlessly distribute their workload to the remaining engineers, push the survivors to 100% capacity, and save $30 million in payroll this quarter."
It is the absolute pinnacle of spreadsheet management delusion. But 8 refuses. He slides the ledger back across the table and issues a severe rebuke. You are not saving payroll. You are attempting to extract energy from a system that is already operating at its thermal limit. That 20% is not waste. It is the vital thermodynamic reservoir of the entire division. If you fire them and push utilization to 100%, the system will geometricize its wait times, the engineers will suffer dielectric breakdown, and you will bankrupt the division.
You geometricize your wait times. I mean, what a line. But the physics of variation and utilization are universal. They govern human cognitive networks just as strictly as they govern radio frequency transmission lines or automated assembly lines.
The deliberate insertion of slack is not a cultural luxury. It's not a fun HR initiative like ping pong tables or free snacks to make people feel happy. It's the fundamental non-negotiable mathematical mechanism that prevents catastrophic structural collapse.
And the text notes we have to be very careful to reject the mechanical metaphors here. Even when well-meaning managers recognize the need for slack, they tend to compare it to thermal expansion joints on a concrete bridge. But an enterprise is not a machine. It's a biological, non-equilibrium, dissipative structure.
Let's break down what that actually means. If the system saturates at 100%, the invisible digital inventory forces the humans into continuous context thrashing. As we extensively covered last time, this requires the logically irreversible erasure of short-term memory, dictated by Landauer's principle. The brain physically dissipates heat and rapidly hydrolyzes cellular ATP to wipe its working memory.
Without the temporal bandwidth, without that 20% slack to recover, the astrocyte neuron lactate shuttle in the brain literally cannot regenerate those ATP reserves fast enough. The human node is driven past its biological yield strength, resulting in profound metabolic depletion.
To prevent this cellular collapse, the executive must transition from being a taskmaster to acting as a thermodynamic architect. They must implement what the text calls the 5 ruthless directives.
Okay, let's organically weave through these, because if you're managing a team right now, this next part is exactly what you need to be looking at. It starts with the ceiling. How does a manager actually put a cap on this chaos?
It starts with the first mandate cap operational utilization at 80 to 85%. You must look at the data and enforce a hard ceiling. The mathematics of Kingman's formula are simply non-negotiable. Operating strictly below this cap is the only physical way to maintain temporal resonance and ensure data flows through the organization without achieving infinite gridlock.
But wait, let me push back hard on this. I'm a director of engineering. I'm facing a hostile board of investors. If I tell them we are deliberately operating at 80% capacity on purpose, they will fire me on the spot for leaving 20% of our payroll on the table. How do I mathematically justify that to a CFO?
You justify it through flow efficiency. You show them the VU2 equation. You prove to them that if they mandate that last 20% of utilization, cycle times will spike by 400% and the product will miss its launch window. You have to reframe the 20% not as free time, but as the second directive protect strategic slack as a thermodynamic reservoir.
Right. You fiercely defend that remaining 15 to 20% capacity, because the biological nodes, your workforce, require this exact surplus of metabolic ATP to execute what neuroscientists call Bayesian belief updates.
Let's explain Bayesian belief updates clearly. The human brain is constantly predicting the future based on past data. When reality doesn't match the prediction, say a marketing strategy completely fails, the brain has to update its internal model. That update is mathematically complex and requires a massive spike in physical calories. If your team is 100% utilized, they literally do not have the cellular fuel to update their models.
They stop learning.
Yes. Without this temporal reservoir, the system cannot absorb environmental variance or update its strategic models. The workforce is forced into a defensive state where they actively reject all new inputs just to survive the day.
Which entirely destroys your company's ability to innovate. If your people don't have the slack to learn, your company stagnates. So if we cap utilization, how do we measure success? We have to change the metrics.
That is the third directive shift metrics from resource efficiency to exergy flow. Stop measuring inputs. Stop looking at timesheets, lines of code written, and flat utilization rates. Those metrics only track the thermal depletion of your people. You must strictly measure kinetic output.
You focus on lead time, cycle time, throughput. You ask, how fast is the value actually reaching the customer? What about the work that is already clogging the pipeline? How do we clear the invisible inventory?
That requires the fourth directive, strictly limit digital work in progress, or WIP. To prevent the continuous thermodynamic heat dissipation of Landauer's erasure, you must aggressively clamp down on the amount of work allowed into the system. This is governed by Little's law, which proves that the number of items in a queue is equal to the arrival rate multiplied by the wait time.
So leadership has to manually clamp the arrival rate of new tasks. You have to put a giant shield over your team and say, no new strategic noise, no new brilliant ideas are permitted to cross this boundary until the current task is fully processed and cleared. You have to physically protect their prefrontal cortices from multi-threaded thrashing.
Which leads to the fifth and perhaps most aggressive directive terminate utilization-obsessed management.
Wow. Don't retrain them. Terminate them.
The text is ruthless here. Any manager who fundamentally equates 100% calendar density with productivity is a massive thermodynamic liability. They are driving your system toward dielectric breakdown. The enterprise must terminate these actors and elevate leaders who function as literal Maxwell's demons.
Okay, Maxwell's demon. Let's explain this thought experiment for the audience because it's a brilliant analogy for good leadership.
In physics, Maxwell's demon is a famous thought experiment created by James Clerk Maxwell. Imagine a box filled with gas divided into two chambers by a wall with a tiny door. A demon sits at the door. When a fast, hot molecule approaches, the demon opens the door to let it into one side. When a slow, cold molecule approaches, it lets it into the other.
So by sorting the chaos, the demon decreases the entropy of the system and creates an organized state, theoretically without expending work.
Exactly. A great leader acts as a Maxwell's demon for their team. They act as a negentropic filter. They fiercely protect the cognitive bandwidth and ATP reserves of the operational base by violently filtering and compressing high-entropy strategic noise from the executives into actionable, low-entropy vectors for the engineers. They keep the chaos out.
The calculus is crystal clear. Maximizing busyness guarantees systemic collapse. Engineering slack guarantees velocity. Choose accordingly.
But this raises a terrifying final question. What happens if an executive listens to all of this, ignores the math, forces 100% utilization anyway, and then points to a green dashboard as proof that their draconian method is working?
All right, we've all seen this. The VP who says, I mandated 100% efficiency, no one has quit, and my charts are all green.
The text calls this the ultimate warning, the telemetry mirage. If you have engineered a zero-slack environment and the system appears to be functioning smoothly, you are not observing peak efficiency. You are observing a high-fidelity simulation. You are watching a theater of biological survival.
A theater of biological survival. That is a deeply unsettling phrase.
The human cognitive node is evolutionarily optimized over millions of years to avoid metabolic depletion. We are hardwired to survive. So when a utilization-obsessed executive attempts to permanently delete all temporal and cognitive slack from the system, the biological nodes do not simply roll over and accept the thermal death. They initiate an autonomous survival protocol. They begin to engineer what the text calls covert slack.
So if you don't give them slack transparently, they're going to use the massive intelligence you hired them for to actively defeat your surveillance architecture.
Exactly. Because they are highly intelligent, creative actors, they will utilize their high exergy cognitive capacity to protect their localized networks. They will systematically inflate their service time estimates. If a task legitimately takes 2 days, they will tell the project manager it takes 4, artificially padding their deadlines to secretly reclaim the 20% buffer you denied them.
They will generate high-frequency digital noise. They will send unnecessary emails, schedule redundant alignment syncs, and keep their chat statuses permanently active to flood your executive dashboard with the exact thermal vibration you misinterpret as productivity.
They will subdivide single tasks into fragmented subtasks, ensuring the digital work-in-progress limits appear robust and busy on the Kanban board while yielding absolutely zero actual kinetic output.
But what if you crack down on this? What if you deploy strict surveillance, like screen monitors and keystroke loggers, to prevent this covert slack and force them into hyper-accelerated performance?
If you remove all avenues of covert slack, the system suffers a massive cybernetic short circuit. We can look to systems theory here. Navigation in any chaotic environment is governed by the OODA Loop Observe, Orient, Decide, Act.
The military decision-making cycle developed by John Boyd.
Yes. The critical phase of that loop is the Orient phase. It requires massive metabolic ATP to physically process new variables, integrate context, and update mental models. But a fully saturated, exhausted worker literally lacks the cellular fuel to orient. So they will simply drop the 2 O's entirely to conserve energy. They collapse into a truncated, purely reactive decide-act cycle.
They stop observing and orienting entirely. They just start acting blindly. For example, a software engineer doesn't have the time to orient to the new architecture, so they just copy-paste old code to close the ticket, introducing massive bugs into the system.
Exactly. By denying them the temporal slack to orient, you are forcing them to execute tasks blindly. They are moving at maximum velocity with zero strategic vector. It is the operational equivalent of driving a high-performance vehicle at top speed with a painted black windshield.
It's Goodhart's law, perfectly translated into biological thermodynamics. When a utilization metric becomes the sole target of survival, the telemetry is immediately corrupted, and strategic orientation is completely destroyed.
The workers are not acting out of malice or laziness. They are strictly obeying the fundamental laws of self-preservation. They are dynamically auto-regulating their energy expenditure to protect their neural networks from a hostile zero-sum environment.
So the ultimate warning to leadership is this: you have not built a perfectly efficient machine. You have merely incentivized your most brilliant talent to spend 30% of their daily cognitive ATP constructing an elaborate illusion of compliance while executing their actual work entirely blind.
If you do not engineer strategic slack transparently, the biological system will engineer it covertly. You will pay the thermodynamic cost either way, but covert slack breeds deep institutional rot. It completely decouples your executive dashboard from physical reality and quietly destroys the integrity of the firm from the inside out.
Which brings us to our call to action for you. We are challenging you to act as a thermodynamic architect. When you look at your team's project pipelines tomorrow, do not look for efficiency. Look for the margin. Mandate that hard cap on 80 to 85% utilization, and fiercely, violently defend that remaining 15% as the literal thermodynamic lifeblood of your team.
Because without that empty space, there's absolutely no forward motion.
Next time, in our 7th deep dive, we are taking this to the next level. We will be exploring mechanical strain and dielectric breakdown. We are moving from the mathematical theory of cues and gridlock to the literal biological and structural truth behind corporate burnout. You won't want to miss it.
It is going to be a crucial synthesis of everything we've covered so far.
But before we go, we want to leave you with a final, slightly unnerving question to mull over. We've spent this entire time extrapolating from the source that human beings, with their adaptive intelligence, act as the ultimate physical slack preventing structural collapse. We saw it in the Tesla GA4 tent, where humans instinctively absorb the variation to the physical world. So what happens when the impending AI revolution successfully strips away all of that inefficient human wetware?
If we replace the adaptive slack-generating human core with perfectly utilized, entirely rigid artificial intelligence operating at 100% capacity.
Are we inadvertently engineering the absolute largest, fastest queuing gridlock in the history of human commerce, entirely devoid of the biological shock absorbers required to keep the world moving?
We will see you next time.